I told you I'd be bringing a few friends.
You should have brought more.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Resident Evil Month, and today we're going to talk about the sequel Resident Evil Apocalypse, directed by Alexander Witt, written by Paul W.S. Anderson, and starring Mila Jovovich, Sina Guillory as Jill Valentine, and Eric Mabius. And this is once again a movie that I really don't think is a bad movie. I'm not saying that it's an amazing masterpiece, but in terms of a fun sci-fi zombie action film, again, it's very well done. And a lot of people will usually tell you that the first two Resident Evil movies are good and everything else beyond that is shit, but then there's also a really small minority of people, and I know one of my favorite YouTubers of all time, DXFan619, is a part of this minority of people that say Apocalypse is just god awful, and Apocalypse is just as bad as Afterlife, which is considered to be the worst of the bunch. And I have to disagree. Apocalypse is nowhere near as bad as people will try to make it out to be. It does have some great stuff in it. And I know there are some people that do have problems with it, or there are some fans that are pissed off because, unlike the first one, this one actually follows plots from two of the games, as it takes the plot of Resident Evil 2 and the plot of Resident Evil 3 and essentially mashes it into one script and makes a couple of changes. And really, to a certain degree, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, as you do gotta bring in some elements or storylines from the games to make some of the fans happy. However, if you're just a casual, this isn't gonna really affect you at all. It's mostly just a thing with fans. But really, I don't think it's necessarily bad. For what it's worth, the fact that they took two plots from essentially two different video games and turned it into one script, I think it did a really good job. Usually, when they try to take plots from long running games or anime, it usually backfires because movies don't have the kind of time to convey that. And this actually does it just fine, as this movie does have really good pacing in between horror and action. Once again, combining that sense of survival horror and really awesome action sequences. And I think for the most part, the plot and the action and horror is all paced out really well, and you can follow this movie just fine. It's not too slow, but it's not too fast either. And it doesn't just shove action sequences in your face 24/7, and it does give you a chance to breathe and have scenes where we get to know the characters and understand the plot of what's going on. And I think it's fine. And again, I don't have a problem with the fact that it's not the exact same plot, frame for frame, from Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3. Now, I will admit I am kind of disappointed that we don't get to see Leon Kennedy, as he is my favorite character, as well as Claire Redfield. However, we do get Jill Valentine, and for the most part, she's fine. We get Cena Gully as Jill Valentine, and I really don't think she's that bad as Jill Valentine, and she does do a good job looking like Jill Valentine. And that's a hell of a lot better than what we get from other live actions that don't make any attempts to make the character look like how they do in the game. This movie goes out of its way to get the actor to look like her character. Now, does she necessarily act 100% like the character? No, not exactly, and I will admit that is kind of a problem with these Resident Evil movies. When they do bring in characters from the games, they don't always do a good job at behaving exactly like those characters did, and sometimes they're just a character that's, as some people have stated, they're just a blank slate with that character's name. However, I don't think that's necessarily the case with all of them, as the Jill we get in this movie is fine considering the context. And for the most part, I think she plays Jill fine enough considering the circumstances. I didn't really have a problem with her as Jill. So, with that being said, the plot is essentially Raccoon City has been overrun by zombies as Umbrella has come to investigate what happened in the hive after their team failed to report back in time, and zombies have overrun and take over the city, and Umbrella is trying to suppress the outbreak, but uses the outbreak as an opportunity to test their new bioweapon, Nemesis, and it's up to Jill and Alice to get out of the city before a nuke is detonated, and Nemesis hunts them all down and kills them. And again, I think that's fine. That's a perfectly fine plot for a zombie film. And again, it's basically the two of the plots from two of the games. So essentially, you do get plots from the games, and isn't that what you fans were complaining about the first time around? Well, they didn't give us plots from the video games. Okay, well, you got it now. Oh, but why is Nemesis chasing Alice? She's supposed to be chasing Jill. Well, as they explain, the main reason why is because Jill and Nemesis are two projects, Project Alice and the Nemesis program, which were created by Umbrella to develop a new breed of essentially superhumans, to create a perfect soldier or genetically perfect human, if you will. And that's perfectly fine within the context of the story. It makes sense, and it's much better than just a monster just chasing you for no reason. They could have just easily made Nemesis a generic monster, but they actually do make attempts to make Nemesis interesting as well as threatening, as Nemesis is essentially the main antagonist. And the fights between her and Alice are fine, as it's essentially a fight between two super beings controlled by the same virus. I don't mind that, as again, that plays into the plots that we see in later versions of Resident Evil within the game franchise, as Umbrella was always trying to find way to create a breed of super soldiers. This was basically what Wesker became. So, yeah, it's perfectly fine. Again, you get plenty of Resident Evil here. I don't understand how people say that, oh, they don't respect the source material, these don't feel like Resident Evil at all. What the hell are you talking about? The the first two Resident Evil movies feel a lot like Resident Evil, and definitely so with this one. You get a lot of Resident Evil, and you get a lot of fan service and references. And I love that. And again, I'm fine with that. You see, I don't necessarily need a Resident Evil movie to copy and paste in order to enjoy it. However, if you give me a fun movie with some familiar characters as well as some new characters, and just give enough fan service but just enough references to plots from the games, then I don't necessarily have a problem with it. That's all I want. Just give me an entertaining movie. And this is an entertaining movie. Sure, it might be considered a dumb action movie or a popcorn flick, but what did you want? And to be fair, Paul W.S. Anderson does give us references to John Romero films, and I think that's fine. That not only does Anderson respect and understand the Resident Evil universe and franchise, but he also likes to pay respects and give homages to John Romero films, which basically, without John Romero, we probably would have never had the zombie flick at all. And I like that that is respected. So, with that out of the way, for the most part, again, the characters are fine. There are a good amount of characters that are just cannon fodder. However, there are characters here that we get that are not only from the games, but can be entertaining. Now, there are annoying comic relief characters like, frickin' LJ, and yes, I can admit characters like that can be annoying, but we also get characters like Carlos, Nicholas, Jill Valentine, and I think that's enough. I mean, again, while I would have liked to see a team up of Alice, Claire Redfield, Leon Kennedy, and Jill, I think considering the circumstances, it's fine enough. And as I've said before, I'm fine with new characters being introduced, even though a lot of them do end up dying, so I will give them that. And this is where Alice does essentially become the more superhuman Mary Sue that she is considered to be. However, once again, not necessarily, as she is shown to be able to be overpowered by beings like Nemesis, and isn't exactly perfect. Yeah, she's more superior than the Umbrella soldiers, but that's because the whole purpose of the program was to create a superhuman, so of course she's going to be better than these Umbrella soldiers, but up against other bioweapons, she can be injured or nearly killed, as going up against threats like Nemesis shows, as she doesn't go around like one-shotting things. She's not perfect, and she does almost get killed by Nemesis on very numerous occasions. And again, I don't mind some superhuman elements to kind of give us some better action, because there's only so many times you can show shooting zombies or bashing them in the head before it becomes boring. You gotta spice things up a little bit. which is why I love that we get more bioweapons and we get some superhuman elements to break up the monotony from all the mindless zombie shooting. So I don't have a problem with Alice being a superhuman being. Hell, let's be honest, a lot of the main Resident Evil characters come off as superhuman. Do we really have to go over Chris Redfield's infamous boulder punching scene? Or how about the numerous superhuman things that Leon Kennedy does? And nobody will ever bitch about that. Oh wait, I forgot, this is a live action movie, so people have to automatically hate it on principle. Never mind. But with that being said, the music is once again outstanding. Though the music is done by a different person, this person does give us a really good soundtrack. Both a combination of action music and creepy horror music combined together. I like that, as this is essentially a horror action sci-fi film, and the soundtrack is pretty good. While it's not as good as some of the tracks that Marilyn Manson gave us, it's good enough. And again, these movies have always been known for their good soundtrack. So the soundtrack here is definitely, once again, another high point. And another high point is the action. The action in this movie is really, really damn good. So clearly, the director of this movie does know how to do action scenes. There are some moments of shaky cam, but it's not really all over the place. And the action scenes are pretty good. It's not just the same generic action scene over and over and over again. We do get some pretty good set pieces, some really cool stunts, and I like that, as a good action film will change things up. And this movie does do that, and we do get some really good action. The final battle with Nemesis is really good, with a couple of moments of shaky cam. A lot of the action scenes against Umbrella are once again fine. And the couple action scenes we get with bioweapons like Lickers is also really good. The characters, fine. The action is good though, as this is definitely not a boring movie. So the action is definitely another high point. So what else do we got? As it's honestly hard for me to think of negatives for this movie. I mean, I guess one negative I can bring up is Jill is not really highlighted as much as Alice, even though Alice is technically the main character. So I know there are some people that complain about that, and I guess that can be a downer for some people, but it's not like Jill is just ignored. She's still there throughout a majority of the movie. And let's see, I wouldn't really say there's any extreme continuity errors. At least we'll run into that later down the line. So, again, it's kind of hard for me to think of negatives for this movie. I mean, again, it's a zombie action sci fi film. I'm not really quite too sure what you're really expecting. I mean, if you're expecting like some incredible high art, well, clearly you're looking in the wrong direction. You're watching a live action to a Resident Evil movie. I mean, I guess a lot of people can say that this movie does take away a lot of the horror elements of Resident Evil and gives us more scenes like what we saw in Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil 5. And I guess for some people, I could see that being frustrating, as there are some people that really adore Resident Evil for its survival horror and don't really like some of the over the top action. Personally, I don't mind it, especially if it can blend horror with action together just fine. I say that's a win win because you make both sides happy. And I think it's important for a film or video game or anything for that matter to try its best to make both sides as happy as they can be and not alienate certain audiences. Now, I guess you can also argue that it does alienate certain audiences because it's just a dumb zombie sci-fi film, and I guess technically you're not exactly wrong there. But with that being said, for what this movie is, it's a fun movie. I mean, this is another one I would recommend. Is it as good as the first one? Not necessarily, but it's not really horrid like some of the other movies later on down the line. I would easily give this a 6 out of 10. It's not really that bad of a movie. I don't know why people say that this is just so terrible because it's not. I remember growing up and I would watch this movie all the time on cable, and it would never get old. I loved watching this movie growing up, as my introduction to the Resident Evil franchise was watching my mother play Resident Evil 1 and 2 on our PlayStation and the Resident Evil movies. And this was definitely the one I watched the most. And it never got old. It was always a fun movie. And it's still a fun movie now. It holds up, it's a fun movie, and it's a blast. So, yeah, Resident Evil Apocalypse. I know this one probably isn't as deep as maybe some of my other reviews, but it is what it is. And for what it is, it's a fun watch. So, with that being said, I will leave this movie at a 6 out of 10, and I'll see you around for Resident Evil Extinction.